All right, so we would like to welcome Dr. Rossi to the to our sixth annual Exercise Science Symposium at Grove City College. Our symposium this year focuses on optimizing human performance, psychological, physiological, and nutritional approaches. Just some quick information about Dr. Rossi. Dr. Rossi is a professor in kinesiology in a department, in the exercise science department at Georgia Southern University. He's also the Associate Dean for Institutional Effectiveness and Curriculum. He received his Bachelor of Arts at the University of North Carolina, and his specialization was physical education. And then he went on to get his master's at Appalachian State University in exercise science. And in 2006, he got his PhD at Oklahoma State University and with specialization in human performance. Dr. Rossi's current research interest focuses on the influence of sports training and competition on performance and recovery. It's with that we'd like to welcome Dr. Rossi to the sixth annual Exercise Science Symposium. Now, we'd like to first start off with some background information. So maybe Dr. Rossi, you can tell us, a little bit about your career and and how you got to your current position.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my undergraduate degrees in physical education. At that time, I was introduced to exercise science and also the area of strength and conditioning. And so I decided I was going to be a strength coach. And being in North Carolina, I decided I was going to go to App State. And so I ended up going to App State. Probably my first year, I was still on the trajectory of doing strength and conditioning. I was going to finish up at App State and then, go into the field as a strength and conditioning coach. But during my time there, I was offered an assistantship in the neuromuscular lab with Dr. Hoff. And so I participated in research and I really got into it. I taught a class while I was there. I enjoyed the teaching aspect and then also the research aspect. I also enjoyed the schedule. So I enjoyed the breaks that come along with academics and and I really got into the research. I didn't think I would be as interested in the research as I became there. And so from there, I started researching PhD programs and ended up at Oklahoma State. And so originally I went there to study resistance training and immune function in older adults. And on my spare time, I wanted to look at immune function in more team sport athletes. So there was a lot of research, dealing with endurance athletes, ultra endurance athletes, and immune function. So I wanted to look at some other types of athletes, mainly team sports. And so I kind of did that on the side. After about a year or two, I kind of transitioned into another advisor. And he was doing muscular performance, specifically EMG, MMG. And so we did a lot of performance testing. We worked with wrestling, Oklahoma State wrestling. And I grew up wrestling, so it was, I got really interested in that. So I kind of stayed with looking at immune function in athletes and doing muscular performance testing in athletes. And continued with that, really enjoyed it. And then actually Georgia Southern was my first job and my only job so far. Wow. And so when I came here as a faculty member and assistant professor in exercise science. I actually got the opportunity to go out to the USOC. It was a coaches conference, Symposium. And there I learned a lot about overtraining syndrome and symptoms of overtraining, and learned about the rescue. So And so I was doing a lot of stuff in the lab where we were collecting blood and saliva, and it was pretty expensive and time consuming. And so I kind of transitioned over into the RESCUE, which is a paper and pencil test looking at stress and recovery. And so I kind of moved away from the lab and got more into a practical application working with teams. And here at Georgia Southern, a lot of the teams and coaches were very receptive to me poking around their athletes. And so that's sort of springboarded my research line, looking at a lot of the first studies that we did were kind of observational. We just kind of monitored athletes across the season, looking at where they were at various points. And we've kind of evolved from all different types of testing that we do to where we're at currently. So I don't know if I went way too long on that.
No, that's good.
No,
I'll leave it as a broad.
Yeah, and that was going to lead me to a big question I had for you was how your research, or what led you to that research interest. So I think you did a really nice job of explaining how you came from that physical education, early beginnings, was going that strength and conditioning route, and it was you ended up with this GA, which had you doing research, and that really turned things around for you. And the type of research you were involved in eventually brought you to where you are now, and your current interest. So my follow-up that I'd like to hear you talk about is, recovery is really broad, right? And it's a big topic. I would say it's kind of a hot topic. It's been a hot topic for a couple of years now. But would you consider a specific area of that broader topic that you specialize in, or do you feel like you fit more in that broad genre? How would you describe your primary research focus?
I would say, so to go back to kind of touch on what you were talking to a little bit earlier. Yeah. So I feel like I've gathered all these different experiences, and it's sort of culminated into what I'm doing right now. Starting from, the physical education aspect, where we didn't really have a major in exercise science. You kind of had two tracks. And so I knew I kind of wanted to go on. And so when I got to App, we did a lot of performance testing, and so looking at, how athletes responded to training. So that kind of planted the seed. And then actually at App, Dr. Neiman, who's, got a ton of experience in exercise immunology. And, I did a lot of, work as a GA, helped on, a lot of his projects looking at immune function. And so that kind of got planted in there. And then when I went to Oklahoma State, we did the performance testing, and I kind of put the two together. And then at that coaches symposium, that's where I really started thinking about, athletes, specifically athletes' response to training, and sort of, in my head, it's, we can't prevent fatigue, but, how do we manage fatigue? And that's kind of where we're at right now. And so, again, I didn't know I'd be so long-winded, but answering questions. But it's been kind of a journey to get to this specific point that we're at now. And so I would say, if I had to describe what we're doing, and I say we because there's a bunch of us, working as a team, and I'm probably the smallest piece of it. But I would say, you asked a specific area, probably load management is probably the buzzword, or training load, managing that training load. Right. That's pretty much where we're at with our coaches. And I kind of moved in my whole career. I moved out of the lab, where I felt like I was kind of showing up, collecting. Unfortunately for athletes, early in my career, I was collecting either blood or saliva, which is not as fun, for them. And then I would disappear into the lab, and then I would show back up, weeks later. So we've tried to get to a point where we can work with coaches on a daily basis. So we're collecting data, we're looking at that data, we're interpreting that data, and then we're providing that data as quickly as possible. And so far we've gotten to a point now where we're providing data on a daily basis. It hasn't always been that way. And that's sort of where the technology has evolved for us, where we've moved out of the human performance, lab, analyzing blood and saliva. We moved into the biomechanics lab, not literally moved in, but we utilized equipment in there, like force plates and things like that. And then we found that, even that data had to be analyzed, and it took a little bit of time. Right. And that's where the paper and pencil tests really jumped out at me. I was like, oh wow, this is cheaper than a force plate, cheaper than an ELISA.
Just slightly, right?
Yeah. And easier to train people on, if the paper breaks, which is, I spilled a diet spread on the desk like moments before I logged in, and I thought the whole day was going great. But so the paper and pencil, but there are drawbacks if you're familiar with doing sort of perceived scores and paper and pencil tests. So there's a trade-off, and so that's what we've been doing for the past several years, is trying to figure out that test battery that works best for our athletes here, that we work with. What we do here may not work for everyone, and it's been a trial and error, and really we've been working with the coaches, and that's been a big thing, is the coaches have really bought into what we're doing, and they really believe in, that we're trying to help. And so it's a nice two-way street, so to speak, and so they'll tell us, hey, you may get excited over this information, but it's not doing me anything, and so that's what we've had to learn, where, we can present this stuff, and you and I and other academics are really interested in it, but from a practical standpoint, it doesn't do a lot for the coaches. So we've had to try and figure that out as well.
It's interesting you say that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, and I got to be careful. I feel myself getting ready to hijack this interview, so forgive me if I hog the time. But it's interesting you say that. It's ultimately, it has to come down to, what does the coach feel comfortable with when we're talking athletes, right? What does the coach feel comfortable with? What information are they bought into having? And I think another thing that you mentioned that was interesting is the speed at which you're providing information. That's also part of that equation for a lot of the coaches, I'm sure. I have a good buddy who he was the head assistant coach of a D1 soccer program. He was kind of doing his own recovery and analytics, and strapping polar heart rate monitors on everybody, and he just got to the point where he said there's too much information. For him, it was time. He didn't have enough time to do his job as an assistant coach, be able to analyze everything and make heads or tail of it in a real-time fashion.
And we have, and it's an old saying, paralysis through analysis. A lot of these systems that we've utilized currently and in the past, a force plate for me is, I got variables all over the place. And if they don't make sense to the coach, then, it just doesn't, there's no, like you said, the assistant coaches, the experience is almost like spinning your wheels. You just can't, you're collecting data, but you're not really sure what to do with it. So that's been one of our primary goals, is to sort of, and it's a two-way street in education, I grew up playing soccer, and I, grew up playing and experiencing some of these other sports, but, I would never start to begin to say that this data says this, and this is how you should use it. The thing that I always do with coaches is I say, okay, this is how I'm interpreting the data. how you feel it best serves your team, that's you. And so we try and educate the coaches on, okay, this is what we're thinking. And again, we could be off a little bit, because everyone is learning. Like you said, this is kind of this area has caught a lot of attention lately. And so there's a lot of technology that's coming out, and people are utilizing the technology. Now it's just trying to figure out, how do we use, some of these systems will spit out 60, 80, 100 variables. And it's, do I need all these variables, and we found that, over the years, we've really narrowed those down to what really means the most to coaches. And that's our ultimate goal. We've kind of moved into a primary focus of serving, our coaches, because in the end, if they're happy and we're doing, and we're helping them, in turn, it helps us and our students. And again, giving that experience to our students, I think is 1B, so 1A is serving the coaches in athletics and the other teams that we work with. And then again, be providing that experience to our students, to hopefully those are skills that they can take away and serve, when they go out and do what they're going to do, or, if they go into graduate school but yeah, so that's where one of my primary things was trying to get to a point where I could get data and feedback quickly to the coaches, because that was my biggest concern for a while, was that sort of lag time.
Sure. So can you maybe go into a little bit of detail? So like, what teams are you guys currently working with? I think you guys, because I've seen you guys are working with the soccer team. I don't know, what other teams are you guys working with? And also, like, what data, like, what is your day-to-day kind of, data collection look like? Or what data are you collecting? And then what data are you actually sharing with the coach? And like you're talking about, I mean, there's so much data, but the coach might not care about all that data. And what is the most meaningful data that you share? I don't know, are you allowed to share that information?
No, that's very secretive. And we're moving into conference play, conference tournaments. So I can't, no. So like I said, we try and match or group. Again, we try and do multiple measures. We never hang our hat on one measure, because everyone's different. So one test, an athlete or the test is sensitive to pick up something that may be going on with one athlete, but not another. So we try and do a test battery, and we use multiple measures. Cost is going to be another issue. Time, people, just being able to do the thing. So currently we are consistently working with men's soccer here, and Tormenta FC. So I'm not sure if you're familiar. So Tormenta is a new MLS organization. They're League One, and they have a League Two team.
Okay.
And they're housed here in Statesboro.
Cool.
And so this may be year 2. I should probably know this. So we are doing daily practices, with all 3 teams when they're all playing at the same time. So you can just imagine sort of the logistics of managing that. And then, so those are our 3 primary teams that I work with. Now, there may be some other folks, or the same folks in our team that are working outside. In the past, we have worked with men's and women's basketball, men's and women's tennis, as you're aware. We've done, I feel like, swimming. That was another one that we worked a lot with. But really, soccer at this point, because of the technology that we're utilizing, so we have just recently transitioned to StatSport, which is a GPS system that we use. It's used by the U.S. national teams, men's and women's. I feel like I should be getting a plug for this, but And then no, but I mean, it's a great system. It's utilized by a lot of different professional teams. And so we use that for running performance. We pair that with our polar systems, so we get heart rate data as well. And so on a daily basis, our routine is, or their routine, is they show up, to practice. The players, and we've been working with them for a little while now. They know the routine unless they're new to us. But basically, the players will come up to us. They'll report currently, I believe we're using the PRS, perceived recovery score, and they will report their recovery score to us. We record that. We hand them their system, their stat sport system. So most of the players utilize that system. They use the same one. And then they basically go out and practice. Well, excuse me. We did add to that battery a jump mat performance. So we bring a jump mat out to the field, and they'll do a couple jumps. They go out, they practice. Usually our team will stay out there. And then post-practice, we get an RPE score from each player. And then they do a post-training jump. So that's the daily sort of data collection. So we're really into right now looking at 24-hour recovery and then weekly recovery. So with that, once those systems are collected, our team will go back to the lab. They'll upload the data. And then what we do is basically we take that data and then put it into Excel files, and we upload it into Google Drive for the coaches.
Good. And what data do you guys share?
Pretty much everything. And then we've whittled it down. They like sort of that high intensity stuff. So variables, they look at high speed running, distance covered, time spent in high, mid, and low, primarily high. They want to gauge, how hard or how intense a practice was. The other thing we've been doing too, which is kind of interesting, is we've been getting scores from coaches, RPE scores from coaches, and we presented some of that research just to see, if a coach is thinking, practice is going to be, low, moderate, high, and then, do the players perceive it the same way? Does the data sort of correlate with that, or match that? And so we've kind of collected, so we've got some perceived scores, we've got some physiological scores, we've got some running performance scores. But again, really, I mean, coaches are really interested in distance traveled, in a practice, calories burned, high speed, like number of sprints, anything, deceleration, acceleration, anything that could be a marker for intensity, we kind of utilize. And again, in the past, we've given them all the variables,
right?
And sometimes in the past they've been color coded. Green is team average, matches team average. Orange is below average. Red is they're above average. And that's where in the past we've met with whichever coach is sort of assigned to make rhyme or reason of the data. We'll meet with them and give them our sort of interpretation. And that's where it's fun, because sometimes, I'll be sitting in my office looking at the data and I'm like, whoa, and this person's in the red, and oh my gosh, well, it's a redshirt freshman, and the session was designed to mimic a game because they didn't play. And so I'm like, okay. So, I mean, honestly, a lot of times, people talk about the coach's eye, and coaches are really good at, determining whether the practice was intense or not intense enough, but but sometimes they enjoy that validation that we can give them with the data. We can give them heart rate averages, distance traveled, this is how long they spent in high intensity running, and they'll say, okay, we meant to have a pretty intense practice. For me, a lot of times the interesting practices are the ones that are labeled recovery practices, just to make sure that they are recovery practices. But that's basically what we've been doing as of right now. Again, I've used force plates, I've used, all sorts of different types of measurements, and this provides us an opportunity to get the data pretty quickly back to the coaches so they can utilize it.
I'm curious. You've talked force plates, jump mats. You were drawing blood. RPE. If you had the unlimited budget and time, let's just say unlimited budget and time, what tech would you use? And how would that change from what you're currently doing, maybe, if any?
That's a good spin right there, because I've thought about that. If I had unlimited funds and manpower, so to speak, and I guess my question back would be, what would be the primary purpose of what we're trying to do? So if I'm attacking this from a research, where I want to present research and publish, which, in academics, that is important. And,
Sure.
Sky's the limit. If I could do, core temp, sweat rate, if I could, in addition to what we're doing currently, draw blood, grab saliva, I can look at, immune function. I can have students working in the lab, doing that. So I also have to assume I have endless GAs as well, because they're the backbone. They're the
gates are open.
Yeah. I can talk about all I do, which really, I'm sort of not telling the whole truth. So on a day-to-day, we've got a great teams of other faculty, GAs who have been first years, second years, who've been trained up, and they're out there doing it day in and day out. And I get to come in sort of and do the interpreting and sort of recommendation piece of it. But from a practical standpoint, sometimes I feel like too much analysis is almost detrimental. Like you get lost in sort of analyzing everything. You're just analyzing to analyze. Sometimes, I'm teaching a course right now, and it's looking at programming, and I always, give the example of, we can teach you all these different tools but you don't have to use every single one all the time. Like you can sort of get lost in like, oh, I've got this and I'm going to, and so, to me, I like the idea of doing some kind of performance measure that's valid and reliable for that sport. And then some kind of perceived. I am a big component of asking the athlete, how are you feeling? It could be as simple as that. They walk onto the field, how are you feeling today? How recovered are you from yesterday's training? Now, I will say that's dependent on you being confident that the athlete is being honest with you.
Right.
So, from a research aspect, I think we're pretty close. There's some things I would like to add, like nutritional analysis and recommendations, looking at other variables related to immune function but I think from a practical standpoint, I think we're pretty close. This is I wish I had like 15 more systems and, because, and 20 more GAs and, because I think, I like you said, I think this is an area that people are really buying into. I think there's been some exposure with professional sports. So, my 7-year-old is a huge NBA fan, and so he's always telling me about this person and that person, But with LeBron James, they talk about management, and training, or I guess fatigue management is, or I forget the term that they use, but they basically will sit him at certain points. And so I think people are hearing that and they're asking questions. And so, but to get back to your original, because I kind of spun off, I, like I said, I think a performance variable, a couple of those, again, that you're confident with, and then some perceived, psychological, perceived exertion recovery scores. I think those would be good.
I think it's nice to hear that. You don't need a lot of the $1,000 and plus tech to be effective.
No, and yeah, because force plates are awesome.
Sure.
I mean, there's for research purposes, and but it's amazing how we we originally started doing drop jump testing.
Yeah.
So they would stand on a box, and we'd tell them to do a drop jump, and it was amazing how many D1 athletes couldn't sort of do a drop jump, and we were like, okay, didn't imagine that, but and then if you don't have someone to analyze the data, you're kind of from the force plates, and so not saying that we wouldn't utilize force plates, and we have mobile force plates, and I would love to wheel them out to the field, but I don't think our biomechanists would be too happy with me wheeling those out of our lab. But the jump mat works just as good for us. From a practical standpoint, the paper and pencil, as I've gone from a Rescue 76 down to a how do you feel?
Yeah, right.
Right. I don't know if you're familiar with the Rescue 76, but it can be intense, even though it's a 3 to 5 minute process. But you ask someone to do that every 3 days, even every week. I was finding athletes just circling the whole page, and so I was like, I will adapt. Message loud and clear. Yeah. So we've kind of gone down, from just different, even different perceived, we've athlete burnout, to now a one question, now research wise, it may be some limitations, but, from a practical standpoint, we love using RPE and RPE load, session load.
Sure.
We can move into different areas. When they go do their conditioning, we can actually track that training load versus distance traveled with our GPS, our stat ports. So we can that's been kind of a limitation, but now we work, pretty closely with our strength and conditioning staff, so we can get that data as well. And they do a lot of performance stuff that we look at it.
Can you explain?
Collaboration. Oh yeah.
No, sorry. I was going to say, maybe you can explain the concept of training load, right? Because there's now multiple, teams are doing that. Our head men's soccer coach is doing that on a pretty much, I think, daily basis. I don't know if there's other teams that are doing that except
Just soccer.
Yeah. So can you explain a little bit, what is training load, and how do you go about doing this, and what's the importance of that again, and how can the coach utilize that information?
The way we utilize it from a monitoring standpoint, so we have multiple measures of training load. So we look at, you've got external and internal training load. So distance traveled, time spent training. Those are probably, time spent training is probably the easiest, to calculate and sort of monitor and organize. Distance traveled, again, we use our stat sports system to do that. We've also got the other one that we utilize with training load is we look at specific running performance. So again, how long were they in what we call high speed running or low speed running? And so different systems will have different speed zones. And so we'll kind of track that as well. But another system that we used would actually calculate physiological load and mechanical load, and then from that come up with a one measure called training load. And so physiological load took into account heart rate and other, physiological variables that were collected. Mechanical was, again, the running performance and things like that. So we've used those three types of measures to provide to coaches. And then some of the heart rate stuff they kind of look at as well. But really our biggest one is sort of that overall, distance traveled, session RPE load. So again, that's a score times, how long they trained. And we can do that in where they do strength and conditioning. When we did swimming, they actually sometimes would be training 3 times a day. So they'd be in the pool, they would do, in the strength and conditioning room. And then sometimes they had some, dry land training. And so we could then manage all those different training sessions into one, where before we were limited when we couldn't really get information from those other sessions. We basically would just be monitoring them on the field or in the pool or on the court, wherever they're at. But really our biggest one is distance traveled. If the system does a physiological mechanical load that takes into account other variables, we'll utilize that. The stat sport does a little bit different. I forget the terminology, but it basically has it has 2 different types of overall loads, if I remember correctly. We just started utilizing that system, so I'm not as familiar with it as I should be. And then, but then again, the session RPE, if I hadn't already mentioned that one.
So if you don't have,
it quantifies. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you can go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, for us, it quantifies how much effort an athlete is putting in, and so we can track that. Really for us, from a programming standpoint, for coaches, a weekly tracking of that total training load. So, if they're sort of ramping up for 3 weeks, theoretically, we know that an unloading period probably needs to come soon, and that's why with our coaches and most of our coaches, and they're working closely with strength and conditioning staffs, they utilize a periodization plan to drive their programming. And with periodization, there's always that planned unloading sort of recovery transition periods, which is, to me is number one in managing fatigue is utilizing, that periodization type plan. Because you can always sort of project out, okay, we're going to have an unloading period. We're going to have a time to rest and recover. And I think that's also where that psychological aspect comes in too. Those transition periods of reduced training and unloading mentally is good for the athletes as well. So even if, physiologically you're not seeing anything, or even performance-wise, you're not seeing any decrements, mentally there may be some just, some sort of, they may be getting tired mentally. I don't know how else to put it. And so that's why we try to do multiple measures, and training load. Some of those external, internal are some of the variables we look at. I feel like I went on a long rant. I don't know if I answered the question or not. But.
No, that's good.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that, after quantifying those training loads, have you seen any noticeable changes in how the coaches are scheduling practices or working with their athletes?
Yeah, yes, and a lot of times, so there, and uh, what I see the biggest impact is individual athletes. So I like to call them red flags, and usually I need multiple red flags, not just one red flag, because you could have something just kind of, with a measure. And what I mean by a red flag is kind of a not normal response, so an RPE score that's super high, or a perceived recovery score that's low or not good, or heart rate responses that are above team averages. And so and we work closely with our athletic training staff as well. So usually we're kind of constantly back and forth, saying, hey, I'm not sure if this is really anything to be worried about, but, and so we kind of, alert them to certain people. And so there may be reduced training that goes on the next day just to sort of be preventative. And I like to be proactive. Unfortunately, sometimes, rest periods come after injury. And so we probably don't want that. We want a planned rest period, not a forced rest period. So I try to hopefully allow the coaches to be proactive, where they're like, well, maybe if we can sort of reduce what an individual athlete is doing. Now, as a team, if we start seeing team averages, which we have, where they're kind of reporting higher RPEs, and I have seen where coaches will kind of ramp down, practices and the intensities. And again, the volume, may change the volume. What we've, always recommended is probably the quickest way to help is to sort of reduce that volume. And at least here, that's what we've seen. But yeah, and what was I had another thought. Oh, and a lot of times too, we're very seasonal. So we have, we break down when we're analyzing data, we look at preseason, at least in soccer, for men's soccer college, we look at preseason as two periods, preseason 1 and 2. So preseason 1 is kind of that initial period. Collegiate soccer can be kind of intense, where preseason is only 7 days, or maybe a little bit longer, until they actually run into an exhibition game, give or take a couple of days. But they run into, exhibition games. So then, so we kind of break it down as, heavy training period, and then as they get into exhibition, and then in season is actually conference. And so we'll look at data in those chunks, and usually we're going in 3 to 4 week chunks. And they coincide, and we'll look at for us, our big rivals are going to be, and hopefully, App State, Georgia State, those are kind of our, and then of course conference, you want to peak for conference. And so we look at chunks of periods. So we'll look at sort of how athletes responded, how the team did, and we'll plan for next year, so
yeah.
Long story short, as this whole thing is gone, I've gone way long on my explanations, but a lot of times the data will help us planning for the next year. But, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll just speaking anecdotally from our soccer coach, who's been dipping his toe in these waters for the last 3 years. He would probably say, amen to that. What you said there, that it's more of an effect on the next year, or even the next big segment that you might have in their season. For one, he would say that a lot of the data is helping to validate him in, like you mentioned earlier, his perception of how hard a practice was, or how hard did the guys, put effort forth. So that's helping him to validate and to learn a little bit too, where maybe he was a little bit overshooting or undershooting a practice, but then to be able to take that and roll that into the next year, and to, and I love your comment that I think you might even said the number one item to manage fatigue is a periodized plan. that's going to help him. He's already talking about how he's going to do things and periodize things a little differently as far as overall training load goes for his athletes at those key moments there.
Yeah, and also, you know, and we like to be very visual with when we're reporting training load. So we, you know, distance travel, time spent training, and session RPE are probably the variables that our coaches like the most, you know, to visually see when I show, okay, here's, you know, we usually break it down by position and we'll do it by team. So they can look, you know, preseason 1, here's team, you know, training load, and then by position. And so, but they can see, you know, luckily and happily, we'll see this stepwise increase and then, you know, in an unload period weeks. And so they get excited, you know, like, oh, we're, you know, and we'll say, yeah, you know, because we don't, you know, on a day-to-day, we're out there observing and collecting data. So it's kind of this observation. They use that data then to plan ahead. They already have a plan in place. Now they may, like I said, individually change things.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes what we, you know, will provide information, and in an ideal world, they could pull, you know, all these players and sit them. But, you know, as you know, with athletics and winning, that doesn't always happen. And they're, you know, they'll tell us, man, that's great to know, but, you know, we're going to just.
Phil's got to play.
Yeah. Or, you know, and, you know, it's like, hey, ideally you would, you know, you would do this, or, you know, and they say, well, you know, thank you, but, you know, unfortunately we can't do that, you know, or, you know, and that's the one thing we have to, as academics and researchers, you know, sometimes we don't understand that idea of competition, you know, and so for us, it's like, oh, well, you know, A plus B equals rest, you know, and it doesn't work, you know, doesn't work
Right.
that easily, you know,
Right.
there's, you know, there's some kind of give and take and sort of the management aspect of it. But what I'm really interested in lately is sort of that preseason intense training, looking at how players come out of that, you know, and then roll right into a season of heavy training, you know. So what we've tried to really promote is that, you know, prior to coming on campus for that formal preseason training, that they're fit, you know, that general fitness. So then coaches can then get into the sport specific fitness and training. But, you know, if you do have an individual who for some reason doesn't respond positively to preseason training, how do we manage them to get them back, you know, sort of, you know, in our biomechanics lab, you know, they do a lot of return to play type stuff with concussions. And so, you know, that's my, you know, I'm trying to, maybe I can do a return to play, you know, like, but
Sure.
So, but so we've kind of looked at, like, how do we manage training load and fatigue in that preseason to make sure they're at their best, you know, player readiness that they can be as they move into the in season, because it just gets even more intense. And then roll academics into it, you know. You know, a lot of times my students will forget, you know, stress comes from all different sources. It's not just what happens on the field or the court or in, you know, their strength and conditioning sessions. There's, you know, worrying about classes and, you know, and all that other stuff too. So we take that into account. We try to. But the other thing I've been sort of looking at lately is sort of that training load leading up to a competition, especially when they have multiple competitions. So what does day 5 out look like compared to, you know, day 3 and 1? You know, theoretically you have this taper, but, you know, you can't taper every week, you know. And so, you know, how do you manage that load, especially if you have multiple competitions within a week? And then, you know, what does that, you know, that training load look like after a match, you know, or competition? And it's different, you know, for a redshirt freshman who maybe, you know, so just sort of really looking at it that way too. But so it's just, we collect that data. It's just different ways to look at it and try and find meaning and management.
So I'm interested because you guys have been doing this now for a while. Have you seen any
And we
like?
still haven't figured anything out. No, I'm just kidding.
So have you seen like clinical outcomes in terms of reductions in injury, or for example, before this method versus after this methods, do you see with your, for example, athletic training staff, are they reporting less injury, or how about just actual performance outcomes? Are certain teams more successful because of this?
On it, like, we haven't really documented it that well. Again, it's more of our observation. I'll be honest, my original sort of why we were brought in to work with men's soccer was they were back in the day, when I was an assistant professor, and they were experiencing a lot of injuries. And what we found was they weren't doing a lot of fitness testing and collecting data and really promoting that off-season training. And so what was happening was, athletes were showing up and they didn't have the general fitness to withstand, preseason training. And the coaches were, for lack of a better, they were 2 steps ahead of the players' conditioning. They wanted to get really into sport specific type stuff, really the intent, sprinting. And so we were finding a lot of like injuries leading up into in-conference training. Oh, wow, I look really big on TV. Are you guys still there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. It switched and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. And so we were brought in to try and figure out, like, okay, what's going on? And so we started doing a lot of, assessments on the athletes. And what we found was, after spring training, they were really fit. But when they showed back up in August, they weren't quite as fit. So we started sharing those numbers with them and saying, here's a target, and providing motivation, as coaches do provide motivation. And so they were showing up fit. And so that was one, yay. And so then from there, we moved on and we started saying, okay, now that we've tackled that issue, now we've moved into managing training load. And really what we found was we don't have any injury data that, shows that we prevented hamstring pulls or anything like that. But basically, really, to me, the buy-in is the coaches year in, year out come to us and ask us to do what we did the year before. They feel like what we're doing is providing them, we say we're providing a service, and we're hopefully, but that is one thing I really do want to try and figure out, is sort of how to document, that this is working. I haven't quite put my finger on the best way to do that. We do work with our AT staff, but to me, again, I don't have any formal data, but they keep coming back and asking us, to provide that service. So I take that as
something's happening.
Yeah. Where in the past, when I was that guy that showed up with a needle, and a vial for them to drool into, maybe not implants, back. But now I think, I think the athletes are buying in too as well, and that's really, really important, especially when you're doing like perceived type stuff, scores, and we try. The other thing too that is really important to us. So one, getting the data back to the coaches as quickly as possible, being as transparent as possible is why we're doing what we're doing. And 2, to be in the background. Like, now we've gotten to the point where athletes, they will walk up, grab their stuff, give us the scores, and they're on their way. It's like a 3-minute process. We're in the background. We're not slowing things down, where in the past, if we did lab type measurements, when we utilized, force plates and things like that, we had to direct them to a specific location. They had to do what they had to do, and then they had to then go to their training environment. Now we show up, where they're training, and we get what we need, and we're out of the way. And that's kind of that was a huge motivator for us to figure out how to do that. So again, I don't think I answered the question, but they keep bringing me back. So I think that's
this is great. And I think we all want to be mindful of our time. We're about an hour in. So first, are you okay on time so far?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I know I have at least one more, maybe two more big ones, not big ones, but just burning questions for me.
Yeah.
This whole idea of like a sports scientist, this training load management, it's almost like it's opening the doors for a kind of a new career, right? You can go work for a D1 institution or a pro team and with a team of people that are essentially doing what you guys are doing. I mean, are you kind of seeing maybe that as a trend, or is this something I'm maybe dreaming of?
No, I haven't. Well, I know there's, so soccer, as we call it here in the United States, that definitely has been utilizing this type of
for a couple of years now, many years.
Yeah,
now.
and the different systems that we're utilizing. Some of the issues that I hear is, like you said, you gave that scenario of an assistant coach who's been assigned, okay,
Yeah.
You're now the data guy, and they're like, well, I was trained to coach. I wasn't, trained to be the data guy. And so, yes, I think people want the data guy, or girl, excuse me, I should, data person, personnel, and so, and that's been the big thing, here is, even for us, sometimes we look at all the data and we're like, well, what does it mean? And so that's what we try and provide the coaching staffs here is, hey, we'll do a lot of this stuff for you. Now, where, and this is me personally, where our road ends, is basically how does it apply to making decisions on the field? Meaning, do I cancel practice? Do I, and that's where we kind of stop and we say, with your coaching knowledge and experiences, we've given you some more information to make decisions moving forward. I see with American football, like NFL, you start seeing these, these Catapult is another system out there.
Yeah.
They've got the shoulder pad, cage. And so, big schools, I went to Oklahoma State. I've seen some presentations from their group, Alabama, even NFL teams now, are utilizing NBA, they're all utilizing sort of this training load management. But you can always teach someone to collect the data, but you need that person to sort of be able to interpret and manage and present.
Meaningfully.
Yeah, present the data too. And we've spent just as much time trying to figure out what variables mean the most to coaches and what combination and things like that. And so, and it's trial and error, and I joked earlier about when we still haven't figured it out, it's always changing, like, oh, maybe we should look at this, or,
there's so many things you could look at. I think that's an issue. There's so many.
Yeah. And I, for me, I get overwhelmed really easily, like I have to, everything, even the shirt and tie. I was just lucky this shirt was up next. I think I'm not really sure, but if it didn't, you guys were going to get some weird combination. And that's almost how I am with, data, and, I don't want to get too, out of the, get too, I want to say crazy, but, use too many things just because it's out there. We've tried to really narrow it down and try and figure out what means the most to us. Now, it could be different for, what they're doing in the MLS professional and over
Sure.
in, in the European leagues and different things like that. And that's why I'm always looking at the literature, just to see how other people interpret and what they're measuring, what combinations they're using, and just to, and, it always kind of, for me at least, and from what I've noticed, it kind of gets back to those, distance traveled, RPE load, high speed running, heart rates, zones, how long were they in certain zones. And so I kind of stick with that. And then, I'm always open to suggestions and that, like you said, I'm going to conferences and seeing multiple sessions on fatigue management and training load. I mean, there was recently a couple years ago, maybe a whole conference on training load, and so, and it was, it was made available, some of the sessions on the internet. You thought I would have, received a birthday present, from, and so I read his paper, and so I'm listening, Carl Foster and, the group out of Australia and, and so there's different folks out there doing different things. And so it's interesting,
Who are some of the, just quickly, who are some of the other key players out there? You mentioned a group out in Australia, but just off the cuff, who are some of the big names in terms of researching this athlete management, load management?
Yeah, I mean, and so I kind of pull from a lot of different areas. So a lot of, training and performance is sort of initially, but like out of Australia, you'll see a lot of, or I run across a lot from, and I'm probably going to butcher, Coates, Coutts.
Yeah.
A lot of rugby. Johns Moore, if you're into, soccer, they have a lot of research coming out of there. I'm I'm from the App State, so we have Dr. Stone, if you want to look at programming and testing and just, managing, Dr. Hoff, who was, my mentor at App State and still is, and now he's in Australia, doing a lot of things. Bill Sands, I think I have that right. He was very early in looking at sort of monitoring athletes. If I remember correctly, he worked a lot with gymnastics and looking at circumference and skin fold, thickness and hand grip strength, and just tracking that. And what does that mean, so the guy who developed the rescue, I try and keep up with, is it Kelman? Mark Kelman? I think that's, I just printed out, I should look, but I feel like, yeah, Kelman. So he was the rescue, but he was the one that I heard gave a great talk at USOC and introduced me to that whole paper and pencil, like, oh wow, but yeah, there's a bunch, and if you look at, I don't know, there seems to be, like you said, there's a lot more coming out and a lot more people are getting into it. It's just, what works for you? That's really the heart, like you said, ideally, if you had every, no expenses, you can have whatever you want, it would probably look very different than, someone else in my situation where we are limited, we have to sort of choose what we do. And, but yeah, those
but
are
I think I was going to say, even at that, it sounds like your experience has showed you that some of the high tech may not be the most applicable anyways. And,
right.
And in the end, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to, research is one thing, but even the end game of research is usually to point some direction towards improving outcomes in a practical setting, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's why we love, the the GPS systems that we've had and currently use have been great. They're not, they won't break the bank, and they provide a lot of data. They're, pretty much user friendly. I say that, I don't operate them on a day-to-day basis. But but they provide a lot of quick data, the ability to grab that data quickly. And so we definitely like using that with soccer, our soccer teams here. Now, would that be the best equipment or data measurement tools for other sports? Swimming, no. So we use Session RPE with them. We created a swimming specific wingate test. If you guys are familiar with the wingate on a bike, we did it in the pool, so they didn't like it, but
I don't think anybody likes the wingate test.
No. Yeah. So again, but for soccer that seems to work, but we, here we really like multiple measures, and we really value sort of those perceived, because we feel pretty confident we're getting legit responses from our athletes and coaches. Like I said, if you're getting that circle the whole page thing, like I told you about with the rest, might as well figure out something new. And it's not a knock on the players or the instrument. It's just it's not working for that group. So.
I had just one more.
I was going to ask, where do you foresee like your research in this whole field, but specifically at Georgia Southern, kind of going from here?
I always tell my students, so they allow me to teach one class now a year, and so and it's a periodization class. I really enjoy it, but I really want to get into the other sources of stress, and really, especially like collegiate athletes. And so there was a couple of studies looking at academic stress and sort of those time periods that we're all familiar with, like midterms, right before that sort of like Thanksgiving break, and then post and finals. And so there's some initial studies out there that I've seen looking at, I forget how they term it, basically limited practice, during these, time periods. So whether it's a injury, a full blown, like they're out, or a strain or something, or they're sick or what it was. But I think that would be interesting to really start documenting and managing, or, observing, monitoring other sources of stress. You asked me if I had, if I could do whatever I wanted, I think I would love to dive more into the nutrition aspect, especially collegiate athletes. Sometimes we find, athletes could probably eat a little bit, their eating habits or could be improved, so to speak, whether it's post or pre or whenever. So if I could have that, I would like to get into that, but ultimately managing those other outside sources, specifically academic type stress, just I'm in a collegiate, environment. The other area too is that whole protocol for recovery. So there was a paper that came out a while ago, but basically it was a recovery points. So like you got so many points for utilizing, like compression garments, hot cold baths, training logs, massage therapy, and you get, and it's so I would love to dive in to see what our athletes here, and the other teams, Tormenta we utilize or we work with them. But what do they like? And then out of those, what are actually the best,
Sure.
or, just kind of, because we've done a little bit a while back. We looked at some compression garments, the ones you sleep in and the ones you travel in. And we didn't find any physiological differences, significant differences, but perceived, definitely saw a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, those that wore them and those that didn't. And so, they asked me, they're like, well, I should stay away from it. And I said, no, I mean, if they feel great, it's that whole, I always joke around about the uniform, look good, feel good, play good, like if they feel good, like keep doing it,
Yeah.
But, I'm always interested in if you give athletes, especially at this, at the college level here at Georgia Southern, what would they gravitate towards? Is it ease? Is it, so, there's that massage therapy, the foam rollers, the, pool sessions, the ice cold baths. I don't know if they do ice baths, but unless they're forced. Nutritional diaries, training logs, really, yeah. The other one too that I'm really interested in, I just haven't been able to, is sleep. So,
Yeah.
cheapest form of recovery. It's the easiest, and it's just something that we've tried different things to manage or monitor sleep, like the different kind of like Fitbit things and stuff like that. We actually do. That is one of the things we do with our Tormenta players, and I think we do it with our men's soccer as well. We'll ask them how long they slept and the quality of their sleep. So I kind of like that. That's a new piece that's been added in.
Nice.
We've always really appreciated sleep and its value. It's one of those things that's kind of hard to. I do have a colleague here who does a lot of good work with heart rate variability. So another interesting area, to look into, but yeah, academic stress, sleep, and then, what do athletes gravitate for recovery and doing some research looking at those different methods. I don't know if hopefully that answers.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in the nutritional component. That's that's what was that?
Oh, I was gonna say that the thing you were kind of updating me with what you guys are doing with soccer, that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean the whole, we did a study last year looking at ketogenic diets and comparing ketogenic diets to high carbohydrate diets on performance. But now we're doing, the dietary side of things. It's sometimes hard, to adhere to. You put somebody on a, ketogenic diet. It's pretty restrictive, especially, living in America. It's not the easiest thing I'm going to fully adhere to a ketogenic diet and consume less than 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. Versus now we've transitioned. We've done a couple of studies now on, ketone supplementation, and now we're doing this one study on the effect of this ketone ester, which significantly elevates your ketone levels on recovery. Now, we don't have any data on that yet, and we'll share that data with you if you want to see it. Yeah, that would be really interesting. I'm interested in that because I feel like that's a really underserved area, the whole nutritional component, because obviously that is a big component,
especially in collegiate athletics.
Yeah, that or supplementation.
Yeah, we did early in my career. We were so I was into like IL-6 for inflammation and so but we were doing something with body composition. It was like high protein, low carb diets in college. It was general population college. We did it in the fall, which was poor planning on at a university with a large American football program. The attrition rate was terrible. We get these food logs and you didn't eat, and they're like, well, and so never mind, so yeah, I know the struggles with nutritional studies, but it's super important. It's just one of those things, like it's hard to it's hard to especially if you're doing an intervention type thing, that it's easy to collect food logs and and sort of but again, you're assuming everything's filled out honestly. So
Yeah, talking about recovery. I'm still recovering from that study, the interventional study where we put people on different diets.
yeah, those are
Yeah.
tough. Yeah, especially
Yeah.
with humans. Like you need
Yep.
that's where, when you work with I have some colleagues that worked with, mice and things like that. So apparently they, 100%, they'll start and finish a study. But,
Yeah. Free of charge.
yeah. So humans a little bit harder to motivate.
You have a question?
I'm good.
Okay. So do you have a?
No.
I usually like to finish, these interviews just with maybe any type of advice or maybe feedback that you can give the up and coming, exercise science student, because so we'll play this interview, at the symposium, and a lot of our exercise science students, obviously will come to, watch that as part of the whole symposium. So I'm always interested, everybody has different, takes, Dr. Noakes has a different take, you'll have a different take. So what is your advice or, for up and coming exercise science students?
Just in general, or
Yeah, just in general, or going forwards, in this field. I mean, because obviously we know, I mean, there's so many different things you can do with
Yeah.
with exercise science.
yeah, and this is probably looking back as a student and not taking advantage, being in my current role as my administrative hat, I deal with a lot of student affair type stuff. And probably the biggest thing is I would be like, my recommendation is go out and get those outside of the classroom experiences. I mean, if you guys are doing research, with different athletes on campus, and a student is interested in possibly doing that in the future, go volunteer immediately. I always tell, I do a lot of parent Q&A sessions in the summers. That's when we do our student orientation. So I'm always telling, because I don't see the students at that point, but I'm always telling the parents, like, hey, pass a message along to your student, get them involved if there's clubs, or, like, go be a part of things outside of the classroom. A lot of times we have several secondary admit programs within our college, and one of those is physical therapy, and a lot of exercise students here at Georgia Southern are interested in physical therapy. And so typically they're very good in the classroom, but I always try and tell them, hey, what separates you from someone else who is very good in the classroom? And it's those experiences. Or if you like the data analysis and working with athletes like that you've heard me talk about with, our experiences with men's soccer and Tormenta, go volunteer and get those experiences, become that data person,
Yeah.
like learn that, because an assistant coach would like to have someone walk in and take that, from them so they can, coach. But really it's, it's going out, and I wish I had done that, volunteered and just gain that experience. We have a lot of undergraduates on our research team, and they're walking out of here with, presentations at our regional conferences, our national conferences. Some of them have publications, in journals, and so they have just all this experience that I never had, and so they've got, so get experience. Do well in the classroom, but then go find those faculty members, those, those opportunities to gain that hands-on sort of get out there, because, sometimes what we teach you in the classroom, it doesn't always apply. And so you've got to be able to apply some of that stuff that you learn in the classroom, and then what happens on the field. There is some, not as cut and dry as it sometimes seems. So I think those outside experiences are huge.
Yeah. Now you guys obviously have a great, program. If any of our students are listening to this, I mean, if they're interested in like working with teams and athletes, is that something they can they can do, or do they have to enroll in the program, or what is the specific, what does that look like if somebody's listening to this and go, I really want to work in this type of setting and working with the teams, kind of what you're describing here?
Yeah, I mean, so traditionally our students, so traditionally our how do I spin this? Traditionally, we work with current students, so they're enrolled taking classes. But if you're talking about someone who is, currently with y'all, and we do a lot of recruiting for our master's program. So if they graduate and want to come, to Georgia, we'd be more than happy to tell them the opportunities that we're having. But also, if you do have students that are interested in getting experience and they're still working on their undergraduate degree, there's definitely some opportunities, especially, if we wanted to do some collaborations and things like that, I think that, but we're always looking for good, undergraduate students who are wanting to work on their master's program. We do have some opportunities where we do have master's students, GAs, that their primary focus is working with our soccer team. They don't teach. They don't. Now, I think it's good to be well-rounded and have some teaching experience, but but if you have that person who really wants to be the data person, for a professional soccer team, we definitely have the opportunity to sort of get in there and do some of that work and be really focused. So we've been lucky in that sense that I don't think we could do half the things, if we didn't have that. And we have a good, like I said, a good core group of undergraduates, master's students. We have students transitioning into our master's program, so they've been trained. But yeah, if any student, whether they're graduating or they're finishing up or just starting, if you want to pass along my email, I'd be happy to entertain any opportunities. We haven't, like I said, I'm open to anything.
Are you open to internships, or have you done that in the past?
Yeah. We've
Really?
had, we actually we've, I'd say in the last 2 years, we've instilled a internship program within our labs. It's pretty competitive, just because of all the things that go along with that, like staying in Statesboro and things like that. But but we have had, I know of two. There's probably more, just but we have had two come from other universities and intern with our faculty. And I don't know if I've told you, or if you've heard, but the old swimming, building, the pool, it's been renovated finally.
That's right.
We just opened it up, so we have 2 biomechanics spaces in there where we do a lot of gait analysis. We've got a treadmill with force plates all over it. So they do a lot of cool stuff in there that I don't fully understand. And then we have the human performance side, and then we also have what we call our motor control area. So they do a lot of work with cerebral palsy, anyone with any limitations, and so they do a lot of work out of there doing training studies. So if you've got students that want a sort of wide range of experiences, we can definitely provide that. Or if they want something very specific, if they're into gait analysis, or we have a faculty member who does slips and falls. I never volunteer for any of his studies, but he's a slip and fall guy. I'm still trying to figure out what that is, but no, he does a lot of cool stuff in there. But and then they've got, and then of course, our human performance side is what I've talked about, but we're also sort of moving into a little bit of we're like tactical athlete. So your first responders and military, we've started moving into that area as well. So a lot of opportunities if anyone's interested. When,
Oh, yeah.
and if they're not sure what opportunities they qualify for, just give them my email and tell them to,
Okay.
you know, shoot me an email and I'll try and help them out as best I can. And most likely I'll end up directing them to one of our, you know, based on their interest.
Well, no, that's really awesome information. Thanks for sharing that, because I mean, I know probably a good deal of our students would be really interested in something like that. Well, Dr. Rossi, we really like to thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you for this. Was cool. Like I even thought of, you know, I think we're all are, you know, we're gonna do all this. You know, we're not bringing anybody to campus. It's
Oh yeah. Well, cool. Well, thank you. Do you guys have anything else?
No, just I wanted to say, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
I enjoyed it. I had a good time, and like I said, if I can be of assistance to anything you guys are doing individually, please let me know.
Yeah.
And I hope your symposium goes off great.